with hammers and men and forges and riveted. They didn't know how to weld yet. And a blast furnace or such things, he'd explain all of that to you. Well, he was a great influence on my life, and he was around me a lot. We were buddies for many years. He actually came from my high school days. But Mangles was a guy that was, for me, very fortunate to have been alongside of. And he kept me from doing the wrong thing a lot, engineering-wise.
Were you telling me that he actually did some things with Hobie Alter, too?
Yes. Hobie was another friend who was a surfer. I was into catamarans. The little catamarans of that time were always made out of plywood, fiberglass covered to waterproof them, and they weighed several hundred pounds. And I said to think of the thing in a way that is conceptual. You say what's important is what's in the air, the sails, and what's in the water. Everything in between, I hope we could do it with mirrors. And I decided that I should make something that held the sails up there and the water, the hulls, with a bunch of aluminum tubing and canvas. And I did, and you could put the whole thing over your shoulder and walk with it. 16-foot catamaran with all this aluminum tubing. I sailed once in a race called the Ensenada race to Ensenada, Mexico, 140 miles in the open ocean. I'm in this little thing called the pipe dream. And I sailed past Hobie. And Hobie's sitting out there hanging onto a piece of seaweed, bouncing up and down in a little plywood outrigger. He says, "Meyers, you're going to win this thing." I said, "I got it made." And I sailed past him, and he stared at my steel tubing and my aluminum and my canvas. And the next thing you know, here we go with Hobie's catamarans all over the world.
Everybody knows the Hobie cat, right?
There isn't a travel poster that doesn't have several Hobie cats sitting in front of the resorts everywhere in the world. So that idea, or that conceptual thinking of the canvas and the tubing suddenly came away from the usual plywood construction. And Hobie was very successful with that. But I give him a lot of credit because he was really, really talented.
Sure.
He did
So
a
actually,
really job.
were you telling me that Ted Mangles actually helped him with
No,
engineering on that?
Ted was just another influence.
Yeah.
You know, if you study art like I did, every artist has his own signature. The signature comes from the study of other artists. And you pick up a little from this guy, and a little from that guy, and a little from this guy. Some of it sticks to you somewhere. And eventually, when you get your own style, you are a little bit of all those people.
Yeah.
But that's just like life.
Yeah.
It isn't just about art, but that happens to be very easy to understand in art. And so those lives that I bumped into, like Hobie and Mangles, were hugely important to the reason for me doing what I do.
So, okay, the next step then, you and Ted Mangles decide you're taking that #1 Old Red there, and you're going to set a record from Tijuana to La Paz. How did that all happen?
It all happened because we were in the mountains during the Big Bear Mountains are outside of LA, and there's snow up there and skiing and all that. And we were up there with a bunch of people with dune buggies in the cabin. And Joe Parkhurst, who is the publisher of Cycle World magazine, is over in his cabin. We were friends. And he phones me up and says, "Hey, I'm over here with a bunch of bike riders." He's the publisher of Cycle World magazine. "And I'm over here in another cabin with a bunch of dune buggy guys." He said, "Why don't you come over? Let's argue." And we did. And we came over and we had a lot of fun telling those bike riders that a dune buggy would easily beat them if given half a chance. Of course, they all laughed and made a joke out of it. Well, I went home. I never thought much more about it. But Ted Mangles comes to me the next morning. He says, "You want to beat those bikes? Let's do it." I said, "I don't see how you can." "I'll show you how you can." So he lays down a bunch of maps in front of me, and we started taking the maps all apart. We knew a lot about Baja, and we discovered that it was possible to actually beat them by like 10 hours. Their record was around 40 hours, and we just theoretically figured out how to do it in 30 hours. Well, that was on Monday, and on Tuesday I went outside and I started crawling around Old Red and tightening things up, and on Friday we went and did it. That was our race prep, in the course of which we had to carry 65 gallons of gasoline.
So you did this in secret, kind of. You didn't really tell
Just,
anybody.
that's all, just Ted and me. And I went out in the shop and I I put those crazy bottles, oxygen bottles, sitting in the corner of my welding shop, and I plumbed them up so you could put gas in them and then take them off and pour them into the tank. And they carried 25 gallons. The car carried 15, so that's 40, so we needed another 25. We carried all the other 25 gallons in the car around us in jugs. We had a jug between our knees while you're driving racing with 5 gallons between your legs. And we managed to beat the bikes by about 5.5 hours because we broke down a couple of times and had some other problems, but we beat them, after which wife Shirley worked at Road and Track magazine, and she took this story to her bosses, Johnny Lane Bond, and they came and we drank to this thing, and they made a press kit that went out around the world to 115 or 20 motoring journalists all over the world to talk about how this little dune buggy had beaten this old motorcycle record, which was thought to be unbeatable. At which point the phone rang and rang and rang for days on end. And there we are. That's the beginning of off-road racing.
And on that run then, so I think you were telling me you actually, or Ted had gotten all the tide charts, so you knew when you could run on the beach.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's a point where you can make a decision. Shall we go this way on the beach? Only if the tide is not up. If the tide is up, you have to go inland around the mountains and the rocks. So we managed to get there at the right time so that the tide was out and we stayed on the beach. Well, that was the kind of Mangles, what we call Mangalonian thinking. And Mangles was a huge genius about things like that.
So then that changes the world at that point, the automotive world, and then the decision you were making on actually could you make this as an available commercial kit. And it seems like you told me a story one time, Bruce, about going to your friend Jack Jensen and looking at it with an eye to how could you make this a commercial project, right? It seems like you told me that he told you you have to lower the cost or raise the price or something like that.
Oh, well, that was back at the very beginning of Manx production. They were made more like a boat than they were a car. You could lay them all up in the mold.
So this car, there's no Volkswagen floor pan under Old Red.
No, it's what we call the monocoque. I built 12 of them, and there was about one a month for the first year.
Labor intensive.
Yeah, and all Bruce Meyers' labor. After the fiberglass was laid up, I put the steel tubes. There were little subframes to hold the axles front and rear, and you could paint the whole thing black, pull it out of the mold, and put the axles on it and wire it, and probably that day you could drive it. It was built to be produced quickly, and however, the reason for quickly is probably dictated to by sales, which wasn't. And I only made about one a month for about a year, so I made a dozen of them. Each one of those monocoques is rare and sought after and lovingly reconstructed.
So then what actually motivated simplifying it further, making it so that it's really, you use a donor Volkswagen Type 1?
Well, here I was being redundant. I was telling people to go get a Volkswagen chassis, and then I went and made all this stuff for them, which was already on the chassis, like the handbrake, or the pedals, or the seat tracks, or the gas caps, or such little things.
Right.
And here's this chassis floor pan leaning against the wall in the shop, right alongside of me. Well, I started looking at that thing more intensely, and I decided all I had to do was shorten it by chopping a section out of it, which was in an easy place to do, and that made it 14 inches shorter, which turned it out to be an 80-inch wheelbase. An 80-inch wheelbase is quite good for a dune buggy. Longer ones means that they lose some traction compared to the shorter ones. So you're looking for traction by shortening it, putting your live ballast closer to the wheels, the rear wheels. So anyway, that's the reason for that. In order to get rid of costs, I should sell them more of let them keep their dune buggy, or probably their Volkswagen.
Yep.
And so the Volkswagen chassis supplied so much of the stuff that I was already making, I left it out in the next go around. So on the 13th Meyers Manx was the first floor pan fiberglass dune buggy in the world.
And that one just took off, and as soon as you had it available as a kit, the orders were coming in, right? I mean,
You know, Steve Smith, dear man, wrote an article. He's a friend of mine. In Car and Driver, we suddenly had 350 orders. I wasn't used to that. We had one set of molds. You can make maybe one a day if you hustle. 5 a week doesn't cut it. When you got 350 orders, you do the math. You're going to be dead very soon. That's what really let the thieves in the door. We couldn't possibly keep up, so we started making molds as fast as we could. Making molds is not a quick deal. You can make a set of molds in about 2 weeks. And so eventually we got up to 18 sets of molds, 20 sets of molds, something like that. But we also got our production up. When you worked with me, we were doing sometimes 25 kits a day.
yeah.
That was
I remember it was a big molding shop. I mean,
well, we had a 40,000 foot operation with 60 or 70 people,
right.
and a mold shop that was beautiful. In fact, it was so beautiful because I had learned to make it beautiful by the fact that the fire department kept kicking my butt about everything being wrong. And I started making things the way they wanted it until the fire department started bringing all the other people to show them what a model fiberglass shop should be like, after we finally did what we needed to. But that's when we got really good at it. We had split shifts, people coming in at 4 in the morning and to work until 12, and others coming in at 8 and work until 4 and all that stuff. So anyway, you learn how to go by just getting up and doing it, rolling up your sleeves and making it happen. When you have a lot of orders, which of course dictates the whole thing, that's when it tells you how many molds to make.